I don't have theme music, la la la.
Secret of the Scarlet Hand starts with an opening letter, which explains Nancy got an internship at Beach Hill Museum in Washington, D.C. The museum specializes in Maya culture, and they're debuting a recently discovered monolith. Nancy got the job mainly because Dad's buddy Franklin Rose is on the board of directors. It's way easier to get a job when you're on a first name basis with the board. The museum is short staffed at the moment, which is a nice way to say that only two other people work there. The second opening scene is Nancy and Joanna talking in the museum. Just like Game 3, Nancy is standing in the shadows so we can't see her face. It's kinda cool that you get to see Nancy, and it also kinda feels like the game is teasing you. We're only showing Nancy from the back, so you can't see what she looks like. Ha 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 ha. Joanna, on the other hand, looks really cool. You can see her reflection in the glass case. It's a nice mirror effect. Joanna shows off the prized jade carving of King Pakal. She explains who King Pakal is, and she smiles when saying Taylor Sinclair is a wizard at acquiring museum pieces. Then we warp to Joanna's office where she tells Nancy about the monolith. This is the first conversation of the game, and it's a neat touch that it's one of the longer, more open-ended conversations. No matter which conversation options you pick, you're going to learn about Hendrik Vanderheun and what glyphs are. Joanna finishes by telling you to do the list of tasks in the lab. That's something new about this game. The task list! You've got an actual list of things to do, which is great! It really cuts down on all the random wandering around and players getting confused as to what they need to do next. It also lets players do everything at once, unlike Treasure in a Royal Tower where you have to go back to Dexter in between every single chore. So you can just do all the chores at one time! The task list is definitely a good idea, and from here on out it's going to be a standard feature in every game. That's how you know a feature is good. They never get rid of it. I think the opening to the game is fine, but I kind of wish it was a little shorter. It's about 4.5 minutes before you get to control Nancy. I love Joanna's sweater and her hair. She's definitely a neat looking character, although her personality is kind of black. She talks loudly, complains a lot, and orders Nancy around. Granted, she's Nancy's boss, it makes sense that she's bossing you around, but I wish we got to see her outside of her professional environment because it seems like she's got a sneaky, funny side. She jokes about her old prom pictures and says semper ubi sub ubi, that's Latin for always wear underwear. Based on everything else Joanna says in this game, would you really expect her to make underwear jokes? No! I wonder where it's coming from. Joanna's office is okay, I guess. It looks professional with degrees and Maya pictures on the wall. I think the best way to describe the scenery in this game is functional. It looks fine. There aren't any places where players will go, ew, that's ugly. But besides for the monolith and the temple, there aren't any places that really pop out at me and make me think, ooh, this is really interesting scenery. In fact, a good deal of the scenery uses muted colors. Like I said, it looks fine. Museums aren't usually flashy. In the office is a magazine with an article about Prudence Rutherford. It mentions her fire ruby necklace, which has a jade carving attached. It also mentions the Topeka Commission for the Arts, which is listed on a donor plaque outside the office. It's kind of easy to miss the plaque since there are 4 screens of plaque names to go through. Nancy mentions Topeka both times you see it, which is how you know this will be important. In the rotunda there's a desk. It has a drawer full of temple keycards. Nancy takes one. Hidden in the corner is an addenda to the Monolith loan contract. I love how Sunny June made a paper airplane out of a signed legal document and threw it in the corner. We don't know if this happened before or after he was fired. Both are equally likely. Sunny June had the internship job before Nancy. He doesn't appear in the game, but other characters mention him. It sounds like he's hilarious. He goofed around all the time and made silly doodles everywhere. I'd love to meet him someday. Unless he's hosting a fake reality show in New Zealand, in which case I'll just pass. The employees only area is home to the lab and shipping and receiving. Sunny has a box of stuff inside shipping and receiving. It's got action figures and magazines, along with a pottery shard and a floppy disk. It's funny how Sunny just shoves important work stuff in with his action figures. Inside the lab is Henrik Vanderheun, who's a friendly guy who sounds smart. He helpfully explains things to Nancy. He's wearing a mask for all of the lab conversations, so you can't see his mouth. I'm not sure why, maybe it saved a ton of money on animation. He talks normally for the rest of the game though, so I don't know. I like his wavy hair and his lab coat, it's a great character design. I would have given him a different shirt though, it's almost the same color as his skin and it looks like he's topless. In the corner of the lab is Nancy's desk, which has her task list. There are 5 tasks, which you can do in any order. An easy task is fixing the pottery. A shard was in Sunny's stuff, the other pottery shard is in a jar in the corner of the first level of the temple. You take the pottery to the lab and you get a 3D jigsaw puzzle. It's a neat puzzle. I like both variations of this puzzle. The only problem is turning it. It's not obvious where you should click in order to turn the pottery. It doesn't help that the clickable area is a rather small circle near the base. I would have made the turning area much larger. Just say the entire right hand side of the screen, you turn it right, and the entire left hand screen lets you turn it left. Simple. The other easy task is ordering bubble wrap. There's a list of vendors taped to Nancy's desk. Silvio Jr. is having a sale. He starts off sounding kind of bored, but he becomes angry when he learns you're from Beach Hill. They owe him a ton of money. This was an interesting way to show players that Beach Hill has financial problems, and I enjoy how Silvio says, "Whoop-de-doo, it's Nancy Drew." Let me complain about Nancy's phone for a bit. She uses the one in the lab mainly for calling Franklin Rose. Franklin is boring and his conversations are mostly unimportant fluff. I wish there was a way we could skip them. Or at least, I wish there was a way we could talk to him about more than one thing per conversation. That way I don't have to call him 3 times just to talk about Prudence Rutherford. Part of the problem is that Franklin automatically hangs up on you. Like here at the start of the game. No matter what you say, he says, "Well, I'm glad you're settling in, Nancy." Then he hangs up on you. The same thing happens when the museum is robbed. No matter what you say to Franklin, he says, "Oh, you zoom in on a case like a heat-seeking missile. I'm glad you're following every lead," and he hangs up on you. He also hangs up on the final conversation when he gives Joanna her job back. "Stop hanging up on me, Mr. Rose!" These are all mandatory conversations too. You can't beat the game without hearing them. I'm babbling at this point. Long story short, I would totally revamp Franklin's conversations so there are fewer conversations, or at least they're more optional conversations. Nancy's phone has voicemail, which I don't think is necessary. People leave notes for Nancy at her desk. That fills the exact same role as the voicemail does. It's way easier to read a quick note than it is to sit through minutes of voicemail. And to hear, "Do you want to hear voicemail?" You hear that option every time you pick up the phone. It's annoying. The final problem with Nancy's phone is the fact that you can't use her desk phone to call certain numbers. You have to call Prudence Rutherford and other people from the phone in Nancy's room, because the phone in Nancy's desk doesn't work. This is a stupid limitation that makes no sense at all. It trips up first-time players, especially because the phone number for Chaco Canyon is in this room. It's in the lab on Henrik's desk. You get the phone number in this room, but you can't call from this room? That makes no sense! I cannot think of a good reason for them to program the game this way. Even more frustrating than the phone is the audio narration task. In Nancy's desk drawer are a bunch of Cocoa Kringle wrappers, the knob to the headphones case, and Sunny's notebook. On page 1 of the notebook, he complains about Bull. Page 2 is funny caricatures. Page 3 is the important one for the audio narration. There's a picture of the museum with all the audio stations labeled. They're labeled A through O. There's no rhyme or reason behind the labeling system, they're just scattered around randomly. Unless you draw out the picture on a piece of paper, you will constantly have to return here to check which label is which. I find it annoying that the picture you have to look at 10 times is on the 3rd page of the notebook. You basically have to flip through the first 2 pages to reach it, then flip back through the pages again to back away from the book. It's just a lot of unnecessary page flipping. The 4th page of the notebook is about adventure games. It seems like a big advertisement for a website called Just Adventure. The way to do the audio narration puzzle is to get headphones, and then you use them on the various exhibits to figure out which ones are wrong. For example, the one about the ham radio is wrong. It has nothing to do with ham radio. You look in Sunny's notebook to realize that station A, you go to the audio narration machine in shipping and receiving, you set station A to 5. That's the narration about ham radio, and now it's fixed. Normally I look up the solution to the audio puzzle. It took me about 20 minutes to solve it on my own without cheating, and that's the background footage which is playing in this video. The solution requires you to change the narration for 5 stations: A, C, D, G, and J. A supplementary clue for this puzzle is in the Stuff to Do file on Sunny's floppy disk. He lists which audio narrations are correct. The 5 he doesn't mention are the incorrect ones. I don't like this puzzle, which is why I normally cheat through it. It's a long, boring puzzle requiring a lot of back and forth between the museum, Sunny's notebook, and the audio machine. I think it was a bad idea to put the worst puzzle of the game at the start of the game. You could argue the puzzle's worthwhile because it forces players to look at all the exhibits, giving them a sense of where things are and who the Maya were. I can accept that explanation, but I still dislike this puzzle. I would have gotten rid of it or at least changed it. Maybe instead of having the audio narration thing and shipping and receiving, make it an inventory item so Nancy doesn't have to go back to it all the time. The Monolith is in the museum's garden area. It looks great, and spinning around it is a lot of fun. When you walk up to the Monolith, Nancy meets Taylor Sinclair, the shady art dealer. Sinclair is a perfect culprit. I can't imagine anyone else in this game being the culprit without me being disappointed it wasn't Taylor. He has a hideous tie, pencil mustache, and comb over. He looks like a slimeball, he acts like a slimeball, he's always pretending to be your best friend when secretly he's only talking to you because nobody else will eat his cookies from Oaxaca. He also has a flair for the dramatic. He warns Nancy something terrible is going to happen. He refuses to say what it is unless you visit him at his office. That's kind of a cheap trick to build dramatic tension, but it works. Besides for Sinclair's hissy fit, there's no sense of mystery or danger in this first part of the game. Everything else is Nancy got a new job and now she's working her job. In his office, Sinclair warns that the art world is being ransacked. Both Prudence Rutherford and the Chaco Canyon Cultural Center were robbed. Beach Hill could be next. He wants Nancy to use her detective skills to stop the crime before it starts. Nancy makes absolutely no effort to stop potential thieves, so I guess she doesn't believe Sinclair's warning. Instead, she changes the topic and talks about Poppy Dada's painting right by the desk. That is some heavy-handed foreshadowing. Whenever you leave the museum, you see a metro map. It's the same map they use in Washington, D.C. in real life, which is neat. You click on one of the labeled locations to have Nancy go there. You can double-click to skip a brief animation of Nancy traveling. One task is to go to the Mexican consulate so Nancy can give the addenda to Alejandro. I don't think much of Alejandro. He's basically the generic handsome guy who works behind a desk, which is a character type we see a lot of in the early part of the Nancy Drew series. He's got nice hair, a plain red shirt, and smiles a lot. That's basically it for his design. He has a one-note personality. Provenance is more or less the only thing he ever talks about, and that's the main reason I don't like his character. He only talks about one thing over and over again. While I'm not a fan of the character, I do like his voice actor. He does a great job of conveying Alejandro's passion. The first thing he does is accuse Joanna of being a modern-day conquistador. He demands that all artifacts with questionable provenances be repatriated to Mexico. He makes a really good case, but sometimes he takes it to the extreme of, "The museum should be shut down now," which is going a little too far. Instead of signing off on the agreement right away, he says he'll take the addenda back to the museum himself. It's not necessarily wrong, but a little fishy. I think that's the best way to describe Alejandro. He's not necessarily wrong, but he's a little fishy. Alejandro's office doesn't have much exploration. You go straight to his desk, you can turn right to see a pamphlet, and you can leave. Those are your 3 options. You can't see the other 2 corners of the room. Same thing goes for Sinclair's office. You've got 3 things you can look at. Nancy's hotel room is a little more expansive because it's a bit bigger, but you still only have 3 things you can look at, one of which is the exit. And the same setup goes for Henrik's hospital room. So some of the bonus locations in this game are kind of small, but they work just fine. The final task is reordering the Maya numbering exhibit. One of the missing tiles is inside a display case, while the other is on a bench in the gardens. You move the tiles around so each one is in the correct spot. Nancy has a laptop computer in her hotel. The background to her computer is her dog, Togo. Oh, it's so cute. You put Sunny's floppy disk into the laptop, and there's a puzzle figuring out what the password is. His password hint is the cow on the Cocoa Kringle bar wrapper. It was a fine puzzle. The floppy disk has a file which says aliens are responsible for the destruction of the Maya. Sure, Sonny, whatever you say. He has a file on the Maya numbering system. It's kind of neat learning their numbering system. It's the only educational thing in the game which I enjoyed and still remember. Seven of the numbers are done in picture format. That's kind of a lot to memorize. Seven? So you're probably going to have to go back and forth between the computer notes and the puzzle a few times to get all the tiles in place. Also on Nancy's computer are notes. It's a written summary of the plot and the various clues. Very nice! Just like the task list, this will appear in every single game from here on out. Some of the notes are clues on what to do next, like I should talk to Franklin about Prudence Rutherford. Nancy's room has her phone, which you can use to call Bess and George. They're playing Go Fish. Partway through the game, the Hardy Boys show up, and boy, are they charmers! Nancy's room also has her alarm clock, which works just like the one in Message in a Haunted Mansion. The clock in the bottom left corner returns for this game. The time aspect doesn't play into the game too much, besides for you can't go to places when it's late, and skipping ahead a few days sometimes makes packages appear. I think it's the best of both worlds. You have the timer, it makes a difference, but it's not to the point where you have to memorize everyone's schedules, like Game 3, which was kind of When you finish all of the tasks, the museum is robbed! Joanna runs into the employees only area and tells Nancy the police are on their way. In the last game review, I complained about the close-up of Joseph being ugly. This game has a handful of scenes which show off the characters at different angles, other than the standard waist-up, head-on pose that we see for every conversation. Joanna running into the room is one of these scenes where a character moves in a unique, different way. These scenes are nice in this game. I like them. It's definitely good, definitely an improvement over the unique scene of Joseph in the previous game. The next scene is Nancy looking at the display case that used to hold the Pakal carving. It's covered with caution tape. It has a paper with a Scarlet handprint, and there's a glyph on top. Nancy has to talk to Joanna in order to take the paper. When she does, she has to immediately go back to Joanna for permission to analyze it in the lab. I find it a little annoying that you have to go from this area to Joanna twice in a row, but it's not that big a deal. Joanna complains that the robbery is her worst nightmare. She's also upset when Henrik is injured. Poor Joanna is having a rough week. Gee, maybe she should be helping to prepare the museum for opening instead of staring at a microscope all day long. That might help. Analyzing the handprint is a simple puzzle. You put the paper in the Krollmeister Spectro X Archaeo Analyzer. This is the first sighting of Krollmeister in the series, I believe. You turn on the machine, you move left and right until there's a match. The match says the handprint is made from HGS. Nancy consults the periodic table on the wall to learn HGS is mercury and sulfur. One of the vendors on Nancy's desk mentions mercuric sulfide. She calls Mac at Keep It Real Restoration. He says the substance is highly toxic. Makes you crazy. Mac is mildly funny. I like him. He says the museum got a shipment recently, but when you go to Joanna, she says they're totally out of Cinnabar. It's a contradiction! Instead of asking Joanna why the supplier disagrees with her, Nancy asks Alejandro. That's weird. There's no reason to bring him into this. Alejandro calls the police on Joanna, which is kind of a jerk move on his part, especially because he doesn't want to talk to police about the theft. Yeah, he was in the building when the alarm went off. He ignored it and left. He gets touchy when Nancy tells him he should talk to the police. Sinclair was also at the museum at the time of the robbery. He's convinced it's related to the other two thefts because the culprit left behind a red handprint at all three crime scenes. Now, why didn't he mention that earlier? He just talked about art theft in general. He should have said somebody specifically targeting Jade pieces like the one in the museum. Yeah, that would have helped Nancy protect it, Sinclair. When Joanna is arrested, Franklin leaves a voicemail, and Joanna leaves a note. That's what I mean about the voicemail feature being redundant. The notes work just fine. We don't need voicemail. Since Joanna's gone, the museum is putting Nancy in charge, because there are literally no other options. Sure, let's have the unpaid intern take care of everything. Who cares if she just started work yesterday? It'll be fine. This was totally unrealistic, and it doesn't really affect the plot because Nancy's first priority as the museum director is to find a way to clear Joanna's name so she could take over the museum again. Nancy would have done that even if she hadn't been promoted. It is a good plot to have Nancy's boss be arrested, though. I would keep the arrest, but get rid of the unnecessary promotion. Since Joanna's gone, Nancy can explore her office now. She has a microscope you can look at. In her desk is a key that opens all the locked display cases in the museum. In Joanna's files are the 5 provenance documents for the Pakal carving. Now, I said Nancy's the only one who can run the museum. That's because Henrik disappears after the theft. He leaves a note telling Nancy to do all the various activities in the temple. The temple has 3 levels, each with 3 activities. First is matching a picture of a glyph to its meaning. This requires you to go through the entire museum again to find the correct glyphs. Or you could just guess. Guessing works too, since the game lets you know when you made an incorrect match. This puzzle was okay. I think if you weren't able to guess, then it would be a huge pain. There is a 5-question quiz, and you do have to go back through the museum again to find the answers. So the audio puzzle is one of several puzzles that require players to look at every single exhibit. For the life of me, I could not find the answer to question number 4 after scouring the museum multiple times. That's also going to be in the background video, to this video. I would definitely change that question. It was way too hard to find the answer. The final puzzle is Bull. I know some people dislike it, but I think it's fun, and it's pretty easy to win because you control both players. I like it better than the educational puzzles, that's for sure. The second floor of the temple has a presentation about Yum Samil, the Maya god of death. There are a lot of slides of him, and it finishes with a fancy animation of him walking. Whoa! It's a neat animation, but why is it here? This animation must have taken a long time to do. Why stick it at the end of an optional presentation? I don't get it. One puzzle is the Maya ball game, where you have to throw a ball into a hoop. You have to do this 4 times. Each time you select how high the character throws and how hard they throw. This was a fun puzzle, although I wish it didn't reset after every wrong answer, because you have to do a lot of guesswork to get it right. It's not like the exhibit on the Maya ball game helps you solve this puzzle. One computer is broken. The logon information is in a file on Sunny's floppy disk. It lets you play the maze game, which was reused from Message in a Haunted Mansion. Oh, if they had to reuse a puzzle from that game, why did they pick the awful one? They should have gone with one of the better puzzles, like the ones from the ending part. Those were cool ones when you open up the pyramid in the safe. Let's bring those puzzles back, not the maze. Unless I'm mistaken, the maze is the only puzzle of the game which is different between junior mode and senior mode. I think they should have had more of a difference between the 2 modes. Say the audio narration puzzle has 5 extra exhibits to fix in senior mode. Or the number tile puzzle has 3 fewer face tiles in junior mode. You could also have longer or shorter quizzes depending on the gameplay mode. I'm just throwing out these ideas. The quiz on the second level has 1 question. It's impossible. The answer isn't in the museum, it's on Henrik's zip drive. It's kind of mean for the game to throw an impossible question at you with no indication that it's impossible. The third level of the pyramid has a calendar stone, which you have to set to the date of Pakal's ascension. It's a fine puzzle. I like how the clues are right there. It's much better than the matching puzzle, where you have 9 gods that need to be matched to their names. You have to backtrack through the entire museum again. And it takes a while just to get out of the temple from this deep in. I don't like it. You can solve this puzzle through guessing, just like the first matching puzzle, but since you're matching 9 things, it's a tall order. The final puzzle is an impossible one. Henrik left a note on it, and Nancy talks about it, so players know this one is impossible, unlike the previous impossible one. The game does not accept the answer until Henrik specifically tells it to you when he's in the hospital. Once you get it correct, you can open the replica of Pakal's tomb. Inside is the stolen Jade carving. After you pick up the carving, you have to pick up the glow stick. The game doesn't let you do anything else. I do want to note that the bridge in the 3rd floor looks cool. It serves no purpose, but it looks cool. After the theft, there is a scene with Henrik. You can trigger it before or after the Joanna stuff, it doesn't matter when. You trigger the scene by leaving the garden area. This is a bad trigger because it depends on players finding it through pure luck. There is no indication at all that you need to revisit the garden at this point in the game. Unless you're revisiting the exhibits in the garden for the temple puzzles, it's unlikely players are going to visit that area. I would improve this unintentional puzzle either by giving Nancy a reason to visit the garden or by moving the trigger somewhere else, like the employees only door, which players are much more likely to go through. When Nancy returns from the gardens, she hears Henrik scream and fall down the pyramid. That's the scene. He wakes up in the hospital with amnesia. Just like Joanna's arrest, this is a good plot line. It keeps things interesting and the timing is spot on. Things started getting a little boring now that Nancy's all alone in the museum. It's a great time to start a new plot and open up a new location. There's a voicemail and a conversation with Nurse Bluefoot. Bluefoot wants Nancy to help Henrik regain his memory through intensive reality orientation, sensory memories which trigger cognitive memories, and pictures. He wants pictures from Henrik's work. That's really all he needs here. You don't need a fancy explanation to explain why. Nancy goes to Henrik's hospital room. Henrik is excited to see Nancy because he thinks it's his snack time. I'd be excited too. He gets sarcastic when she explains the real reason she's here. The first picture Nancy puts up is the Scarlet Hand. Yes, Nancy takes important evidence from a crime scene and puts it on a hospital bulletin board. Nancy is an irresponsible detective, although she can take it back if you want to. There's no reason to take it off the board again, but you can. I would also want to point out that the Scarlet Hand can't remind Henrik of his work. He left the museum before the theft. Henrik recognizes the glyph on the paper because he's the one who originally wrote them. So why was he writing on the culprit's paper? Nancy asks if he's the thief, but Henrik doesn't remember, his head hurts, and Nurse Bluefoot basically kicks Nancy out of the room. He says, "Return tomorrow." And by that, he means, return after you get a picture of the stolen carving from Sinclair. So when you give Henrik the picture of the carving, he gives Nancy the key to his desk. Inside the desk are several items of interest. There's a zip drive and a page that has his notes for translating the monolith. You return to the hospital, you put the notes on his board. He's sleeping right now, so you can't talk to him. The next time you return, he's filled out the board. It says he's 61 and a half, he's divorced. Is it wrong that I want to learn more about his marriage now? Henrik has translated all the notes. He wrote down the glyph for stone. That's the password for his zip disk. Henrik explains the monolith puzzle here. Back in the day, a scribe called the Whisperer wrote a scandalous historical account which said King Pakal was not chosen by the gods. He became king because his mother pulled some strings. Pakal was so mad he locked the Whisperer in the monolith along with her writings. The only way to open it again is to solve a lot of puzzles, make a cube-shaped key with 6 jade carvings, and to solve more puzzles. At the start of the game, Nancy had to do 5 tasks in order to continue. Here in the second half of the game, Nancy has to get 6 carvings in order to continue. In that sense, the game is very balanced. The notes on Henrik's zip drive give you more information on the different carvings and where they're located. Let me start with the easy ones. Prudence Rutherford has 1 carving. You call Franklin to get Prudence's phone number, which is another problem with the phone system. The only 3 numbers written down in the text box are Franklin, Bess and George, and the Hardy Boys. The other 7 phone numbers in this game, you have to remember them. That is so not fair. The relevant phone numbers should have been written down in the text box so players don't have to backtrack to see what they are. That's how it worked in the previous game. Why isn't that the way it works here? Prudence Rutherford is a very fancy-sounding woman. She's still in shock over the terrible theft. She agrees to send you a replica of her stolen jade carving. It shows up in the mail eventually. The Chaco Canyon Cultural Center is run by Sheila Schultz. Sheila can talk about when Henrik worked there, I thought was a nice touch. You have to call Sheila twice. The second time she says she talked to the other staff members. They're going to send Nancy the custom-made box that the carving came in. Nancy can take the box to the table on the lab by the periodic table. She fills it with foam to get a replica carving. Calling people in this game is fun. The dialogue is entertaining, and the voices are just plain fun to listen to. What should be a simple, boring challenge ends up being surprisingly awesome. But even though I like the phone calls, it is still 15 to 25 minutes of nothing but Nancy calling people. That's a little too much. They should have tried spreading out the phone calls instead of lumping them all together. Also, I'm the weirdo who's played this game over 10 times, so the phone calls are less entertaining to me now. Another Jade piece is with the daddles. Nancy calls Henry Daddle. Just like the last game, this is Ned's voice actor doing a boring older man voice. He tells you to call his daughter Penelope. She ends up being Poppy Dada, the artist, and this is easily my favorite phone call of the game. Penelope and Nancy are about the same age, so they have an interesting dynamic going on. She likes hearing about the case, she feels very strongly about her art. She tells Nancy the carving is on her painting entitled Deadly Midnight Snack. Nancy can take it if she replaces it with something that matches the theme. And this is a puzzle. You go to Sinclair's office. It's kind of disgusting here. You have to take a cookie, and then when you look at the painting, he goes, "Oh, I need to go to the bathroom. Ugh." It's like gross. I do not need to think about Sinclair's pooping problems. But that gets rid of Sinclair so Nancy can mess with the painting. Nancy replaces the jade carving with one of his disgusting cookies. One of the stolen carvings is with Henrik's smuggler friends. In his desk is a notebook which explains how to contact them. You have to do math on the ham radio frequency, then you enter the password in the word leche via Morse code. This tells them to mail the carving to Henrik, and the password is the Nahuatl word for snake. If this was real life, Nancy would look up the answer on the internet, but no, she's forced to go to Alejandro. Again, Alejandro's kind of a jerk. He knows the right word off the top of his head, but he refuses to tell you unless you give him the provenance documents. Instead of making a copy like a normal person would, Nancy steals the originals. Alejandro says the word is coatl. When Nancy tries using the ham radio in Henrik's area, the bulb burns out. She has to steal a replacement bulb from the ham radio in the museum display case. When you enter the message in Morse code, the letters appear at the bottom of the screen. I am so glad for that, because getting two 5-letter words correctly in Morse code is difficult. The smugglers send the carving in a locked package. You need to make all the faces go cross-eyed, which was mentioned in one of the museum exhibits. It's a simple puzzle. It's the basic get the pieces into place, but moving one piece moves others puzzle, which we've seen in previous games. Henrik's desk also has notes from 30 years ago, when he visited South America with Big Bunny. Big Bunny is Henrik's smuggling partner. They started the business to pay for college tuition. Henrik hates Big Bunny, so the notes are rather funny. Poppy Dada uses the nickname Big Bunny for Taylor Sinclair, but Nancy doesn't pick up on this. Yeah, she picked up on Prudence Rutherford being important after seeing her name once, but she doesn't pick up on a name which is said out loud. When you get the package from the smugglers, Henrik remembers that the Pakal carving is inside the tomb. He gives Nancy the answer to Sunny's impossible question so Nancy can retrieve the carving. Once Nancy has the carving in hand, she can call Franklin Rose. He agrees to give Joanna her job back. Hooray! By total coincidence, the first thing Joanna does is tell Nancy the code to the box containing the final jade carving. This is a minor puzzle. You're supposed to cross-reference Henrik's notes with the shipping manifest to discover item 113 has the final jade carving. Shipping and receiving has 3 boxes you can zoom in on. You need to cross-reference the manifest with the 3 boxes to find the right one. That is way too much work for a puzzle so close to the end of the game. Luckily, there's an easy skip. Joanna gave you the code to the box. It's the only box that needs a code. It's so simple that when I first played the game, I got it right without realizing that this was a puzzle to find the last jade piece. I forgot to mention, a unique piece of music plays whenever you get a jade piece. It's neat! All the music in this game is neat, especially the Maya-inspired music. When you finally have all 6 jade carvings, you do the 3D jigsaw puzzle again. You have to put the lid on first, which is a rule that's not stated, but easy enough to figure out. To make the keyhole appear, Nancy has to put calendar stones on the monolith. You take them out of an exhibit and carry them to the monolith, while Nancy complains the whole time. Wow, this is too heavy for me. Well, if they're too heavy, Nancy, put them down for a moment. Jeez, Miss Complainer Pants. You put the stones into the side that's missing calendar stones, and you set the calendar to the same date as the earlier calendar puzzle. You need to put all 4 sides of the key into the monolith according to direction. So for example, the north side of the key goes into the north side's keyhole, and north is the Chaco Canyon piece. There's a map in the rotunda indicating what the directions are. I never use it. This would require me to memorize which piece corresponds with which direction, in addition to, what each piece looks like, what directions the monolith sides are facing. I just guess randomly and hope I get it right. It works just fine. That opens up the monolith. Inside the monolith is a skeleton with a book. Creepy. Nancy looks at the book and notices it's blank. That's when Taylor Sinclair appears and steals the book. He's the culprit. He did everything to get his hands on the book so he could sell it for millions on the black market. Sinclair shuts the door, trapping Nancy inside. She uses her glow stick to look around, and this is the final puzzle. The 3 walls have an area on the top and an area on the bottom that you can look at. The solution is to open the skeleton's mouth. Super gross. Opening the mouth gives you a bar. You put it in a place in the upper left, which opens up a space in the bottom right. Inside the space are the real writings, along with a key. You put the key inside the door to open it. This was a pretty decent endgame challenge. It's easy enough to figure out, with a fair amount of places you can look at to make it challenging, and you get a semi-humorous death sequence if you fail. When you open the door, Joanna, Henrik, and Alejandro recite Maya-style poetry at her. It's nice and stylized, but if they were here the whole time, why didn't they try to help open the monolith to save Nancy? Come on, people! This is followed by Taylor realizing he's been tricked. He swears at the ceiling. Confound you, Nancy Drew! That's such a great scene. I love it. It's hilarious. Nancy didn't fool him on purpose. King Pakal was the one who put the fake-out blank book into the tomb, not Nancy. But I still love the scene. The ending letter is pretty much what you expect. Sinclair is arrested, Joanna is forgiven, Henrik has recovered, Alejandro got the carving repatriated to Mexico, and Papi Dada is doing Scarlet handprint art. After that is a trailer for the next game in the series. This is the first game to include a trailer. It's going to be standard from here on out, so if nothing else, this game did a good job of setting a lot of series standards. You've got the trailer, the Hardy Boys, Krollmeister, Sunny June, the task list, and the journal. Those are all things we're going to see over and over and over again. The Find 6 Items puzzle is going to appear a lot too, but you could argue that technically started in Game 3 with the Finding 3 Medallions puzzle. I'd say this is a good game. I don't like it as much as the previous 2 games, though. It's got problems like the awful audio narration puzzle, tons of phone calls in a row, and the phone on Nancy's desk being a pain in general. I just don't like the educational aspect very much. That's just my personal opinion, but I wasn't really a big fan of, learning about the Maya in museums and then going through the museum again and again and again and again to answer educational trivia about the Maya. That was not my favorite. There are also some game-breaking glitches. Some people got stuck because they did the Prudence Rutherford phone call at the wrong time. I got stuck when I put the Scarlet hand on Henrik's memory board, then left the hospital without talking to him. The game locked me out of the hospital forever. It was sad. I couldn't decide whether to give this game a 7 or an 8, so I'm going in between. I give Nancy Drew, Secret of the Scarlet Hand, a 7.5 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching my super long review.